residential location, similar to the same exact concerns the residents impacted by the East Drive Mosque experience had about parking, drainage, and traffic safety on a very substandard road. If you will recall, the planning staff and planning commission initially denied the mosque application due to zoning issues of not enough parking and traffic. But in the end, the mosque expansion approval on its second application had nothing to do with zoning issues. All discussions regarding appropriateness of zoning stopped in the Planning Commission and in the council chamber when the threat of a Justice Department discrimination suit was floated. We all saw the letter from the local Justice Department proclaiming that a complaint had been filed and an investigation was imminent. Do you remember when I was advised not to speak before the Planning Commission for fear of a personal lawsuit by the Justice Department? Do you remember when the residents asked for a delay to discuss with the mosque leaders zoning concerns, but the city attorney urged the mosque leader not to delay since there was enough votes to pass their issue? Again, traffic safety, drainage, parking on a very small footprint were arguments that opponents to the mosque expansion raised were trumped by the threat of a religious discrimination suit. I can only draw a similar parallel to the meditation center site. The meditation center application has stated it will be used as a religious site. The road, drainage, and utility access to this meditation site may be valid concerns similar to the parking and traffic concerns of the mosque site. But the Planning Commission and this council established a precedent by not considering zoning as a criteria to approve the application of the mosque. The fear of a religious discrimination and the threat of a Justice Department lawsuit were the sole reasons the mosque expansion was approved. How can the city allow one religion an expansion and stop another religion? If the attorneys representing the Planning Commission and the city can explain to me today why a threat of the Justice Department suit would be different for the mosque expansion compared to a Buddhist worship facility, then please come forth.
All right. Anyone else? No.
Well, although I am, and as you can clearly see, and have always been very sympathetic about zoning concerns and how they impact people who will have to be part of the change, I personally don't see a difference regarding the religious use of the sites and why their applications should be treated so differently. They are both recognized religious entities and should be treated equally by our city. If a Justice Department complaint is lodged and filed, will the residents completely lose their voice on their next application? The time to react is now. I recommend that we hold this over so that you can sit down with the applicants to discuss the fact that it is a religious facility and there are rules and regulations that land use must follow. But we should never lose fact that there are still good zoning codes on the books that can make an impact, mediate it, make it work when possible. Because the treatment of this residential classification was treated totally different for the same exact facility, different religious practice when the second application came through.
Madam President,
Yes, sir, Mr. Richardson.
I would just like to say that all of the evidence pertaining to the mosque was presented to this council. This council voted and made a decision. All of the evidence pertaining to the meditation center has been presented to this council. The council will make a ruling. It was done by council action, not by no department in the city, not by the mayor, nobody. This council took the action, and this council will act today.
Yes, sir. If there are any questions of staff or anyone else by the council, we would allow that. So, Mrs. Rich, if you would like to ask any particular...
I would like someone to explain to me how unless the Justice Department looks different at the Islamic religion versus Buddhist, if I don't know how the law works, but I understand that there are religious protections for land use applications. It was clearly stated to me when the second application, although this very same body, maybe not everybody because it was years apart, they were 2 years apart, and there were some other council members at the time. The first time their application for an expansion on a very small footprint was denied by the Planning Commission. The applicants brought it up to council, and the council did not approve their application. A second application was made with the Justice Department looking over, as I was recall the expression, looking over our shoulders to make sure we did not discriminate. But what it did, it shut down all talk of planning principles. And not only did the expansion change, it got larger with less parking. So I'm just saying, if somebody would clearly state to me that if indeed the applicants go to the Justice Department, what will the second round consist of?
All right, Mrs. Rich has a question. I know, Mr. Anderson, you initially had a response. I don't know.
It's time to vote.
Well, no, if a council member has a question that can be answered, we can do that during our round.
Thank you. Again, I was not involved that much in the first application, none at all from the planning viewpoint, only when we were contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. To answer your last question, what would round 2 be? I think the U.S. Attorney's Office first is going to make a determination, is this a religious organization? The application was in her name individually. The name of the subdivision was Inner Peace Subdivision. So when it came to the Planning Commission, there were questions, not by the opposition, but by staff and some of the Planning Commission members, is this a religious organization? Ask Mr. Youngblood, can you prove y'all are a religious organization? So I think that's what the first issue, threshold issue in your analysis or your concern is this a religious organization? And that is what the U.S. Attorney's Office would have to make a determination before they decide to do anything else. Now, what beyond that, what that federal law, how it's going to be applied, I have no idea.
Nobody knows.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Davis, go ahead.
Mr. Anderson, my recollection is that when you're talking about various types of tax-exempt status that organizations can get, that there is a 501c3 status tax-exempt organization. Now, this organization that we're dealing with today could have applied, could they not have, for a tax-exempt status that would be granted to a religious organization?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
And it is also my understanding that they did not choose to do that. They chose to seek a tax-exempt status that was not affiliated with a religious organization.
The only evidence presented to the Planning Commission indicated, this letter from the IRS indicates that they did not choose a religious organization status.
Well, I would certainly think, I can't tell what the Justice Department would do. If anyone can, please let me know. But it would seem to me that the Justice Department, one of the things they would look at is what kind of tax-exempt status the organization had been granted by the United States government.
That would certainly be a permanent thing, yes, sir.
Madam President,
Yes, sir, Mr. Richardson.
I got a question for our attorney, Mr. Russell.
All right, Mr. Rossman.
Yes. Got a question. Can the President of the United States, the Governor of the state of
No, sir, Mr. Lawler. Mr. Lawler, sit down. Mr. Lawler, I'm sorry. You have already spoken twice. I don't want to have to raise my voice, but you've had 2 times. So please, this is the council's turn. If we have a question for you, we will ask you to come to the podium.
Yeah, it's my time now. Back to our attorney, Mr. Russell. Can the President of the United States, the Governor of the state, or any other August elected body of officials stop this council from voting today? Do we have the right to vote on this matter today?
Yes, we do.
this a continuation, or do you want to wait until everyone else?
Yes, but I just thought
I know, we all will have an opportunity.
I had questions, and I got an answer that nobody knows what the Justice Department will do, so I'm just as conflicted as starting out in the treatment, the uneven treatment of two religious facilities. Unless I'm mistaken, we were given the incorporation papers of this facility. It was incorporated, or the mediation premise, meditation center. And it said it was for religious activities. It's in their incorporation papers. I don't know where to begin with what tax papers. I don't believe the mosque was asked to present their tax papers, or any other religious facility that I've witnessed expansion, planning approval, was ever asked. So it is a different treatment that is being presented, different benchmarks, and at all times we should be as fair and even-handed as possible.
All right, thank you. I do have a question for Mr. Olson, if you wouldn't mind coming down to the podium, about the staff report. There were a number of comments made about how all this got going with an initial meeting with the staff. If you would just kind of go back a little bit and tell us how the first application was made, what it was, the name on the application, and also the meeting that was talked about between, I think, Mr. Hoffman and possibly yourself, and what was said, and really how staff takes people through these processes. And then as a last question, staff recommendation and why to the planning commission.
Well, first, I was not a part of any meetings about this application. As I think most of you know, I had surgery back in August. That's when a lot of this started. I was out from then until early October after the application had been submitted. So I hate to correct Mr. Lawler, but I was not involved. As far as the pre-development meeting, which is what we call those meetings, we never assure an individual that the Planning Commission will approve their application. And from my conversations with Mr. Hoffman, it is my understanding that the religious facility aspect of this came up during that pre-development meeting, and he stated that if they were a religious facility, then they needed planning approval. If it was not a religious facility, it had to have commercial zoning. So that's where that came.
He said if. He did
If.
not say you are.
That is my understanding. The application does state religious facility. It also does state that the attendance was anticipated at 30 people.
And staff recommended denial to the planning commission?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that based on?
Initially, for the first, we recommended holdover for additional information because the question of whether or not it was truly a religious facility came up during our research. The recommendation for denial was largely based on the insufficient access. The Elong Drive is, as Mr. Small stated, 16 feet. It's recently, within the last few years, paved, not a city standard paving. It's not in real good condition. We would not recommend approval, planning approval for any type of facility in or on this property.
And one last question, too. No matter the religious institution, they always have to get planning approval, is that correct?
In our residential districts, yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Any other questions of Mr. Olson while he's at the podium?
You ask for tax documentation all the time?
No, ma'am, and I think that was done during some of the discussion at the meeting or the Planning Commission meeting when the question arose.
Anyone else? Any other discussion from the council?
Yes, Madam President.
Mr. Small?
First, I'd like to say that with my colleague, Akamala and Marston, in her particular district, you're looking at apples and you're also looking at oranges, as I stated earlier. The property that she was speaking of had been existed since 1991. Property that we are talking about today is not existed. The only thing on that particular property is a house. So therefore, we're looking at 1991 compared to 2016. That was an old facility that was existed. This here is a new facility that does not exist. As you heard, my colleagues, council members, you had heard that it was a lot of misled information from pre-council to this meeting today. At this hour, I have also received misled information. People that I represent also have received misled information. One information that first went out was I was in support of this particular project. I did not tell no one I was in support, and I tell no one that I was not in support of this particular project. Mrs. Nemec had asked me several times by setting up a meeting with the residents. I went ahead and I told her that I would set up a meeting. That particular meeting, I believe, was held on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, not knowing that she had a particular meeting the night before with the same residents. So when the attorney had spoken and said that it was a shout match, it was not a shout match. The resident heard the same spiel the night before I had my particular meeting. If I knew personally that there was going to be a meeting the night before, I would not have a meeting the next night out. The same information that was given the night before, the same information that was given that same night. The residents did not want to hear the same thing. They just wanted to speak of their opinion of this particular project. I do appreciate the neighbors for coming out. I do appreciate the Peninsula Group. I also appreciate Dark River Revival for investing into the Riverside community. The neighbors, the Peninsula Group and the Dark River Revivals spent many, many days and hours and time trying to bring this neighborhood together. They struggled together. They played together. They worked together. The reason they do this is to try to make this area a beautiful neighborhood to live and to play. The residents do not want, I do not want, and the neighborhood do not want more traffic on Riverside Drive. We already have a problem on Riverside Drive due to speeders. There are no sidewalks located nowhere on Riverside Drive. We have 4,000 residents in that particular area. We have students that walk to Pillars. We have students that walk to Gilliard. We have students that walk to BC Rain. We have people that ride their bicycle up and down Riverside Drive with the people speeding on Riverside Drive. Safety is important. As one of the supporters said, yeah, we have a number here, but way more supporters that's outside of this building. I don't need way more drivers and reckless drivers on Riverside Drive. So therefore, I am in opposition of this appeal today. And I thank so much for the resident, the Peninsula Group, and the Dark River Revival for your support in making our area great. And it's nothing about religion. We have plenty of empty shopping centers on DIP. Please fill one of those up for the meditation center. I would welcome you to do that. Thank you.
All right, any other discussion?
Madam President,
Mr. Williams?
first of all, I just want to register my opposition to the comments made that my vote and my voice was squelched or ended, that I voted based on a threat from legal action, but it even implied that it was based on a bias of religion. That has never been the case with me, and it never will be. Simply put, my measurement has always been, and will always be as well, when we consider a planning commission appeal, is were there new arguments presented? Were new facts brought to this body that weren't brought to the planning commission? In this case, there has been neither. And if there had, I would ask that we would return this to the planning commission. It is not the role of this body to overturn the planning commission, and I hope that it will never be. And I will support the planning commission's action as I presented in my motion. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, the motion on the floor is to deny the appeal, so those, I guess,
All in favor of the motion?
all in favor of the motion to deny the appeal, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of, it's kind of doing it backwards.
No, I'll just abstain.
Those in favor of the appeal, Mrs. Rich
I'm
abstains.
abstaining.
All right, so the appeal fails by a vote of 6-1 with the one abstention.
Request for waiver of the noise, no, January 12th. Request for waiver of the noise ordinance on January 29th, 30th, and 31st from